Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Sue, for the invitation. Been working with Sue for almost about 10 years, 9 or 10 years now, and I've done a number of presentations, not since pre-recession, so a lot of things have stayed the same, a lot of things have gotten worse, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And also thanks for the Pennsylvania Chamber for the event. There's a number of things that we're going to talk about. You heard the statistics earlier. And statistics are statistics. They generally don't lie too much. But we're going to talk about how did we get here? What actually created this perfect labor storm, or what created the situation? Because a lot of the issues that have been addressed, or a lot of the training and the refocus and workforce development has really looked at this, our workplace, as an evolution. It's like, oh, we've seen this before. We've had tough times before. When I first came up with the title, The Perfect Labor Storm, it was 1999. And for those of us who were around, it looks like a few of us were, in 1999, there was a shortage of people, but it was different. There was a shortage of people because we were creating jobs at 3.5 to 4 million a month. Or a year, I'm sorry, but a year. Currently we're about 1.2 million jobs over the last year, and that's higher than it's been even over the last several years. So basically, we were creating more jobs than we had enough people. It didn't matter, and some of the jokes that were going around used to be, if you can fog a mirror, you got hired. If you can stand, you got hired. And that's changed. Because now we still have a perfect labor storm. And the message pre-2007 versus now is now we don't have enough qualified people. We have a lot of people that wish they can work. But frankly, we don't need as many jobs as we had before. We need as many jobs as we had before to support our economy. And that's a structural change. We need to create 200 to 300,000 jobs per month for the next 5 years to get back where we were. The problem with that is with automation, technology, globalization, new jobs, new careers, we don't need that many people to get the same amount of work, because at the same time we have high unemployment, our productivity is going up. Now, some of it's because we're overworked. We're cutting back, we're getting lean, and we're taking back a lot of things. So there's a lot of things going on, and that's what I want to address. In order to fix the problem, and this is important for the companies. I mean, a lot of what I'm going to talk today is about workforce development in general, as far as our country, as far as region, as far as our local communities. But beyond that, businesses of all type, nonprofit, for-profit, need to address what the real problems are. And this is not the same workplace. There's various names I've come up with, but this isn't your father's workplace anymore. The future of work meets a new workplace. And we're still trying to modify existing work to fit into our workplace as we know it. And the reality is our workplace as we know it is gone. It's done. So I'm going to talk about some of the main issues with that, and hopefully we won't fly through the slides here. Okay. I didn't create the war for talent. A war for talent was developed, was a McKinsey term, 1992, and then they revised it in 1997, and it's kind of stuck around. We've been in a war for talent. This is nothing new. This didn't come up overnight. As I said, I don't profess to be the originator of this war for talent or the perfect labor storm. It was just an event, and as consultants, we all come up with names for things, and the perfect labor storm happened to stick. But it really has created a war for talent. The war for talent is going to get substantially worse. I mean, that's the bad news. If anybody came here for a good news scenario from me, it's not going to happen. Our two businesses that will, Dutchland and the Geisinger, that are going to approach us afterwards, they're going to talk a lot about some of the successes they've had. And that's important. But I want to set the backdrop to it. Because, frankly, no one is doing enough. Even the 24% that said, hey, we think we're doing pretty good, you're not. I mean, reality is you're the tallest person in a room of short people. I know that may not be politically correct, at least the terms are, but the reality is that there's so many people not doing anything, and they're waiting for something. They're waiting for government to fix it. They're waiting for community colleges and universities, and it's not going to happen. So it's a collective, it really is collective efforts and initiatives. Yeah. I want to take one step back when we talk about skilled labor shortages. There are three possible choices to the question, is there really a labor shortage or a skilled labor shortage? And the answer is yes, no, and maybe. And if you do a search on the internet for skilled labor shortages, you will find that there are people that are proponents, a thought leader, an expert on the labor force, Dr. Peter Capelli at the Wharton School of Business, does not believe that there's a skilled labor shortage. To in a sense, he says there's shortages, but it's not a deep problem as I talk about it and a lot of other people talk about it. One of my colleagues who is also my mentor, and I get a lot of the information from him, Edward Gordon, he just wrote he's written 20 books, but one of the new books is The Future Job. He believes, similar to I do, that there really is a skilled shortage. And for those of you searching for people, there probably is. You believe it too. But there are people that don't believe it. And so, it's yes, no, and maybe. And regionally, there are skilled shortages in some places and not in others. It depends what industry you're coming from. So there's a lot of different reasons. Okay. But there's really 8 factors that are causing this labor shortage, and this is what I'm going to focus on today. Okay. Things that you need to understand the context of the environment that we're now working, because it is not your father's workplace anymore. And unless you've lived, and looking around the room, I don't see anybody that's been there, but unless you lived during the Industrial Revolution, when we moved from agriculture to industry, which was about the mid-19th century, let's say if anybody was living around 1840 to 1880, when they started to automate, when they brought machinery in to replace people doing farm work, it's dramatically changed. No one's ever lived through a time like this. Our grandparents or our great-great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents might have lived through a time like this. But there's nobody in this room, and there's nobody in business today that has lived through switching eras, going from agriculture to industry, and we're going from an industrial age to a knowledge age. Significant, significant changes. So we're going to talk about disruptive technologies a little bit. We're going to talk about definition of work, types of work, 4 generations. Those are the 4 major ones. The other 4 are significant trends and demographic trends, society trends, that we don't necessarily consider because those of us who've been around in the workplace for 30 or 40 years have seen these gradually. Again, not the best metaphor, but it's one that people use all the time, and it's probably politically correct to say it. It's if you put a frog in that hot boiling water, it jumps out. If you put it in water and it's a slow simmer up to the boiling point, it doesn't jump out. It gets caught because it doesn't recognize that it's getting hotter and hotter. And that's kind of the world we live in. So for those of us who've been around, skill gaps, oh yeah, we've had problem hiring people before. In fact, 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I first started to talk about the perfect labor storm, it was Gen X that was the problem. And there's many of Gen Xers in here. Gen X were born between 1965 and 1980. And free agents were different than the baby boomers. This was the generation, the first generation that really didn't get married right away. They were single. They weren't staying in jobs. There wasn't a loyalty. There was a job hopping. It was also the generation involved with the .com. 16 to 20-year-olds were all dropping out of school, not going to college in order to be a millionaire by the time they were 30. That story has obviously gone by the wayside. But there were always these gaps. There was always the prior generation had a problem with the next generation coming. It's now broader than it's ever been, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But those are some of the things that are going on in the background, and you really need to be aware of these when you plan for the future of your company, for growth and the communities. Okay. So there's an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is all these things that are happening. Just yesterday, there was, I constantly see these statistics. Yesterday, one of the nursing associations is having a big meeting. They just, at their meeting, they released a survey. And the survey was, were nurses happy in their job? And 90% said they would choose this career again, but only 3/4 of them, or approximately 3/4, said that they actually enjoyed their job, which gets into another story about turnover and people, switching and moving. But the remarkable statistic was buried down, and they said this was in another finding. Approximately 50%, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but say 40 to 50% of all nurses who hold an associate degree or diploma were not planning to continue their education. So 4 out of 10 nurses who only hold an associate degree or a diploma were not planning to continue their education. They didn't believe that there was a need to have continuous education. There is no job like that anymore. This is in healthcare, and it is one of the most robust and dynamic industries with the highest demand and one of the highest growth industries. So there's a lot of elephants in the room that we don't necessarily see. Okay, so let's talk about this. I'm going to go into more depth on the definition of work change, the pace of change. These are all on your slides, so I'm not going to repeat this to a degree. This is a term that you're going to hear more and more. It was actually a military term, and it was used for training. And certainly with everything that's happened, all the changes in the military over the last 20 years with technology, now we're not putting boots on the ground, we're putting drones in the air. Think about the skill set that's required, the different skill set. Before, if you were 18 years old, if you were 16 years old, then you had a permission. But if you were 18 years old, going back to the days I was in college, if you were 18 years old, you were old enough to go to Vietnam and fight. You don't need boots on the ground anymore. You need college-educated, you need degreed people to develop, to program, to manage, to repair the drones. You need people in an office setting to go to war. And we won't go into that, the whole what the future of war is like, but the reality is it's now fought in boardrooms and military rooms rather than on battlefields. The result's the same. There are still people killed. But the reality is very, very different. But we live in what they call a VUCA world, V-U-C-A, and you're going to see this all around. It's volatile. We know that. We live in a volatile world. We don't know what's going to happen. We didn't know what was going to happen at 9 o'clock. I told Sue, let's take a 2-minute break so we can get mic'd up. And the reality is we're evacuating a building. Things are always changing. We're always literally putting out fires, false alarms at work, especially in HR, especially if you're involved with workforce development of people. There's always a fire that seems to be springing up. Okay? We live in an uncertain world, and we're uncomfortable with this. We're very uncomfortable with the uncertainty that's involved. 2 of the competencies, my business success performance solution, obviously this is my passion, but we do pre-employment, we do assessments, not only pre-employment but leadership. And people don't like change. That's pretty well known. People resist change. Some people don't like change. Some people resist change. Some people start change, but they're in the minority. And now we live in a world that is complete uncertainty. We don't know what the future beholds. We don't know what tomorrow holds. We don't know if there's another terrorist attack. We don't know what's happening with the economy. We just don't know, and we're uncomfortable with that. And what's really critical is it's gotten a lot more complex. It's not that we don't have enough time and that we're working leaner. It's a more complex world. The data deluge, the amount of information that's out there is incredible. It's exponential how fast data and information is increasing. And it's ambiguous. Sometimes we don't have enough time to get all the right information. And other times, but we have to make a decision. We're oftentimes operating as an emergency room physician, that trauma physician. We're triaging in the center of a mass catastrophe, and we don't have all the information, but we've got to make decisions. You got to make good decisions. And a lot of it, most of us haven't been around. Most of us haven't lived in the future that we can bring back experience. So a lot of things that are happening are unambiguous. So this is the world we live in. This is a context. And I will assure you that many of us are uncomfortable with it. Some of us are fascinated by it, but we're troubled by it, we're challenged by it, and there's a lot of people that don't like it, and unfortunately, mostly, there's a lot of people that don't have the skill to operate in that world. Okay. What's the effect on the workplace? Somebody mentioned earlier what's keeping executives up at night. I think Alex you said that. How can we attract skilled workers? How can we keep the talent we have? What can we do to create a competitive environment and a bench strength? And again, that's another area that companies are way behind. The statistics are horrible. Somewhere around 20% of companies, when they're surveyed, CEOs and employees are questioned about do they have enough people in their pipeline, and the answer is always no. Okay. So let's talk about disruptive technologies. This is one of the most significant differences, and I mentioned this just a few minutes earlier. This kind of goes through the major labor market eras. Okay. There's two important parts here. One is the change, and one is the pace of change. The agricultural, farming. You worked in the day, slept at night. Summers were better than winters. But it was you had a lot of people doing manual work. Coincidentally with that, there was a lot of mining. I mean, to get fuel. And whether it was cutting down trees or actually going into mines, it was a real manual job. Not much animation. You know, the wheel was a major invention. And that technology, when you think about a wheel as technology, the wheel was such a major technology that it transformed how products were moved and people were transported. You know, and then along came the trains, and then along came the planes, or the cars, and then the planes. But it was centuries long. It was centuries long. And then we moved to the industrial age. And the industrial age, again, started mid-1800s, or 19th century. And there was a mass movement from farms to cities. That was the mobility. That's when cities started to grow. You needed people to operate machines. It was still manual, but we operated machines. And that lasted through about 1970. But when you start thinking about the recession, going back again to 1970, major recession. In fact, the whole 1970s was kind of a recession in and of itself. But you had gas shortages, again, dependent on that automobile. But there was a shift in the way things were done. But it was the first time that major corporations were laying off en masse. It was the first time in history that the large corporations were starting to fail. And the statistics for anybody who follows those are, a company that was the largest companies in the country were around for decades. And then all of a sudden, some major companies went out of business. Even IBM almost went out of business when they said, who needs a computer? Who's going to put a PC on? Who's going to want a computer in their house? It's only a handful of people. That was Tom Watson, the CEO of IBM, said that. They struggled in the 80s and 90s with Microsoft, with Dell, with Apple, creating that. But even that industrial age lasted for 120 years. And then we went to this computer age where we started to have some automation, or you can call it the automation age. And we got to skilled labor. We're sort of in that right now. But we're now moving to the cyber mental age where it's a combination of people and machines. And the concept is really futuristic. It's almost Jetson-like. It's beyond Jetson-like. Even the Jetsons didn't predict this cyber mental age, where there's so much information that a machine processes it, and it needs a human to interpret it. And then the interpretation's fed back into the machine, and then it goes back to the person. That's the world we live in. And the number one skill that was a shortage is logical thinking skills, which is the highest demand. That's also consistent with another study that just came out by one of the OECD, the Organization of Economic Community Development, worldwide, where it said the U.S. students, and not students, actually adults, ranked 20th in the world out of 21 on logical thinking. On literacy, basic reading literacy, ranked 16th out of 21. Numeracy was worse than that. On all three levels, we rank worse. We are lower than the average literacy rate for reading, numeracy, which is math, and problem solving. So one of my other messages today, this isn't unique to central Pennsylvania. It's not unique to Pennsylvania. It's not unique to the Northeast. This is countrywide. And when you're competing with talent, you're not competing with the next town, the next industry, the next business. You're competing with people across the country and globally, because every developed country is in the same position. The two number one countries for literacy are Japan and Finland. And neither of them have robust economies, but they've got the people. They've got the education. So there are seeds of highly skilled people, and then there's jobs, but how do you get them to move? How do you get them from country to country, which gets into immigration and gets into a number of other things. Also, those countries trying to survive. Okay. So what is, just a brief definition for those of you thinking of disruptive technology. You know, in the background, there was iron smelting. It transformed how buildings were made and products were developed, and also automobiles were made. You know, rubber changed things, going from wood tire or to even a metal tire to there. So it transformed things. Electricity was a transformer. We grew up in the world of microprocessing to think what it used to be. I mean, anybody remember being excited by an Atari or a Commodore? You know, playing Pong. You know, fascinated for hours by playing Pong. Now it's, really? You know, what is this? Even a computer. I mean, the big screens, and now we don't have phones. In fact, young generation doesn't make phone calls, and they don't leave voice messages. They don't respond to emails. Colleges don't even use emails anymore. They use text. There's a transformation that's out there. So what's disruptive? When your business goes out, when what you know and what you're used to, and if you're in business, a disruptive technology literally takes you down. Think of the iPod. Think of a record, a vinyl record, a cassette, an 8-track, a CD, a DVD, and now everything's in the cloud. Now you listen to Pandora, Spotify, iTunes, radio stations, newspapers over the last few years with social media. Think about the transformation, how these things literally disrupted industries and businesses. That's a disruptive technology. It's not the little modifications that happen. It's not iPad coming out with or Apple coming out with a new iPad. It's coming out with something new that totally revolutionizes how people communicate. These are some of the disruptive technologies. Again, all these are in your handouts. The post office, you know, is completely disrupted, but vinyl records, and mentioned that before. This is what's on the horizon. And again, think about this in the terms of business, because either now in some of your businesses, but possibly in 5 to 10 years, these are going to disrupt every one of your businesses in one way or another. It may affect the people, not only the people that you need to hire, but it may affect your workforce. It may affect how long people are living, what they're skilled at, where they go, what their opportunities are. And again, it's a list. We're already affected by automation and knowledge work. To think that a significant portion of our accounting work's done in India. Our x-rays, for those of you, anybody in healthcare here? Yeah. I remember 15 years ago, I had 30 years of healthcare background, but 15 years ago they talked about having a shortage of radiologists. And the shortage of radiologists was critical. They didn't have enough people that if you came in after hours to get your x-ray read. And remember, they were hand-dipped, and it was chemical technology, and then they were digital. And what's happened now is that they had a shortage. So with the internet, and with high speed, with higher bandwidth, and with digitization of x-rays, they were able to have people, not only across the country, but around the world, physicians, read your x-rays around the clock. They were called Nighthawks. Huge organization in India and Australia that did that work. If you go in after 5 o'clock and before 8, it's unlikely that the radiologist on staff is reading your x-ray. They may reread it during the day, but they didn't read it at night when you were there. If it was critical. We're not talking about broken bones, but we're talking about more serious things. So, and this is another statistic. Despite all this change, if you haven't gotten the message, change is happening fast, and we don't like it. We still expect to buy a piece of equipment, a phone, a computer, that lasts for years and years. It's not only that we don't need a faster computer, the technology totally changes. Anybody use a floppy disk lately? Anybody install software using a CD lately? Every time that there's an upgrade, do you get a CD and install it, or it just loads automatically? How many people have iPhone pictures and back them up someplace and you store them that way? So significant, and this is in our lifetime. I do remember getting a TV. It took 38 years for 50 million people to listen to a radio. It took 13 years for 50 million people to adopt a TV. It took 5 years for 50 million people to adopt the World Wide Web. It took 3 years for the iPod to acquire 50 million users. And it took 10 months for Facebook to get 150 million users. And this is a small number. The acceleration, the rate of acceleration, when Facebook was the fastest growing social media, and then it became Pinterest, and then it became Instagram. The adoption rate and how things change your lives is happening faster and faster. So remember the VUCA. Okay. Now, this is nitty-gritty. This is really where you need to change your context and your focus when you talk about workforce development, when you talk about jobs, when you talk about job descriptions, when you talk about what your business is ahead. And this isn't saying 10 years down the road. This is saying, where are we going to be in 3 years? You still got to manage your business today. You got to fill positions. You got to train people, and you got to educate them. But frankly, what you're training people today is not going to be the state of the art in 2 or 3 years. It's going to change. It's going to change for a number of reasons. And it may change because if it's a startup. It may change because you're competing with somebody globally. It may be the economy. But it's going to change. So transformational jobs were there was brawny jobs. That was the agricultural, industrial age. You did things. You mined, you farmed. You extracted things from the earth. Okay. We then moved to the transactional. And most of us grew up in this transactional age. Some of us had parents and relatives who were miners, and we had parents and we knew people in a lot of family who worked on an assembly line in a factory. And then you moved more to kind of white-collar jobs, middle-class jobs, a lot more customer service, retail exploded, accounting exploded, offices exploded. We didn't have factories, we had high-rises with people going to work in suits at one time, and now it's casual clothing, but it happened. And then we moved to this brainy situation, and we're struggling with this. This is the gap. Job descriptions still, for those of you in HR, still reflect a transactional job. This is where we are. Some of it's tough to define. For those of you familiar with what happened with Yahoo a few months ago with telecommuting, where they said nobody can telecommute, big back step. You know, they made the news and they were profitable for a quarter, and now they're back to trouble. Now they're grasping at straws again of how they can monetize their business. it was really a bad move because the real talent sometimes doesn't want to come to work, which gets into a second definition of the definition of work has changed. You don't go to a job anymore. Okay. We'll come back to that in a second. A skilled worker. What is a skilled worker? A skilled worker today requires at least a high school degree. A GED doesn't cut it. A high school diploma doesn't cut it. 75%, 74% of all jobs that will be created between today and 2020 will be high-skilled jobs. There is 125 million people who are qualified for 50 million jobs in this country. Now you'd say, so why do we have a tough time hiring them? They're all low-skill people. People who were laid off, the recession, a lot of people blame the recession, and when we come out of this recession, and I don't care what party, this isn't a political statement, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, whether you're liberal, libertarian, teapot, doesn't really matter. The reality is the recession, the economy did not change, did not cause the problem. It accelerated what we knew was going to happen. The Great Recession was a good time for people to be forced, for companies, to cut back, to shed employees, to say we need to become resourceful, we need to become efficient. And unfortunately, a lot of good people were hurt in that mix. I'm not talking about good and bad. I'm not talking companies did it the right way. But what I'm saying is they knew it was coming. They were waiting for the baby boomers to retire and get off their payrolls so they can cut their workforce and upgrade it. Not necessarily upgrade it with lower pay people who are younger, but upgrade it with skilled labor force and to automate. And it's changed. And so there's 125 low-skilled people applying for 50 million jobs. The situation's almost reversed on the other hand. The jobs that are being created are highly skilled, and the people that are available don't have it. Okay. Peter Drucker said this, and he's passed away 8 years ago. The most valuable asset of the 21st century institution will be its knowledge workers and productivity. We all know that. We talk about it, and it's absolutely true. But again, this isn't something that just happened post-recession. We know this, and he said that in the 1990s. Okay. Types of jobs. I mentioned that the definition of work is changing. We don't go to work anymore. 40% of the federal workforce, which is the largest employer in the country, does not go to work on an everyday basis. They telecommute. They work from a distance. They're contractors. Many of us don't go to work. How many people here can work from their home a few days a week or a day a week? Okay, a couple hands went up. You don't get up and go to work, and even going to work changes. It's not a factory job. We have shifts, but even industries that require 24-hour people are using technology. There are hospitals, remote hospitals, that are wired in to primary care centers. When they need a physician, it's done by telecommuting. People don't always get up and go to work. Beyond that, we don't have lifelong careers, which is good to know because the young generation changes jobs 13 times by the time they're 38 years old. Okay? The tenure of a younger employee is 1.8 years, average. Now, some of them aren't in the right jobs, and some of it gets distorted because of the economy, but even before that, it was about 3.8 years. Okay? Lifelong careers, full-time jobs, part-time jobs, fixed hours, they are a thing of the past. You have to design your workplace. This isn't about the employee. You have to design your workplace to accommodate the highly skilled workers. And it's not short-term, it's permanent. We work on project work, we work flexible, contingency. Contingency is a nice word to say permanent, temporary. Okay, the temporary worker, which I didn't have on that side, part-time, temporary worker was a seasonal worker. Now you have people that are full-time employees. They may be with your company for 10 years, but they come and go. They may have 2 jobs. They may be working for you and your competitor in good jobs. We're not talking they're working at McDonald's at night to make ends meet because you didn't put them on a full-time. They're contingency. You use them when you have a project, when you have a need. Shared jobs, which is similar, and virtual jobs. Okay. No one is going to pay workers anymore just to show up. I have a button, and I'm sure I brought some today. I have a button that I had made up a couple years ago, and it says, how many unemployed workers do you have on your payroll? Read the disengagement studies. Read the dissatisfied employees. If somebody's disengaged and dissatisfied, they're not working. They get paid. Maybe they work, you pay them 100% of their salary, but they work 50% of the time. I see a lot of heads nodding. So, and basically, that's not what's going to be tolerated. The fourth thing is, one of my pet subjects is the generations. And again, remember, the things that are changing that we don't necessarily address in workforce development and in our strategic planning of hiring is disruptive technology, the definition of work, the types of jobs that we need to produce, or thinking about what our jobs really are. How do we define a job to get done what we need to get done? And the last thing is these generations. We have never lived in a time that you had 4 generations working. And it's created some of the other events that I'm going to talk about in a second. We've never had that. Okay. We're soon to have 5 generations. Yesterday, front page of USA Today picked it up when I came in. Okay. 1/3 of all baby boomers will work until they die. Some by choice, some by need. That's created, what you'll see in a minute, is called a gray ceiling. Because if they're still working, they're not allowing somebody else to take the job. And if the Great Recession did anything, it accelerated that. It made it worse because everybody's retirement funds went away. Doesn't mean baby boomers would start working, but they would leave their jobs and maybe start other ones. They'd work part-time. But now many can't. And they're going to continue working. But again, remember what I said earlier? We're not creating jobs fast enough. We'll never create as many jobs as we did before, ever. Because we don't need as many people to do the job. Someone asked a question to me the other day, and it was about kind of going back 100 years, Pennsylvania development, workforce development. We built our tunnels. The tunnels for the turnpike system were built in the 30s. It put people back to work. A lot of it was done through the New Deal and post-Depression recovery. And they used to hire hundreds and hundreds of men, give them a pitchfork and a shovel and a tent. And they'd go out and build the turnpike and go channel through a tunnel. That's what they did. They built the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel. They did these things. Now what you would need is one person to the job of 100 men, one person to do the job of 100 men, who was college educated, is paid several $1,000s a day to operate heavy equipment. We can't have the same, when we talk about go back to the way we recovered our economy after the Depression, we can't do it. Because you need one person to do the job of 100 people. And in many of your businesses, you need one person to do the job of 10 people, or one person to do the job of 5 people, because you just don't need that many people anymore. But we have these 4 generations that we're working with, and you mentioned the other thing that was at the top of the chart, the top of the survey, was work attitude. I've got to propose to you this. Work attitude. Is it a bad work attitude? There are bad attitudes. But there's pretty bad attitudes in baby boomers, too. Somebody says, I don't need to learn that. I'm 4 years from retirement. They're one of those, how many unemployed people are on your payroll? Okay. So there's bad attitudes. There are bad attitudes in baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y. I'd propose saying there's a different attitude. And younger people, taking away the ones that have a bad attitude about a lot of things, have a different attitude, and they're more aligned with that contingent work, the flexible work, the virtual work, that they're more concerned with their career than your lifetime career. it's transferable skills, it's a number of different things. So we're in the mix. This isn't about generations, but it's important to understand where people come from. So the veterans are kind of pre-1945. They're still around. There's still a lot of 80, 85-year-olds working. My mother just turned 90. She volunteers, but she works. Yeah. Baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and we're about ready to come out with, well, they're not quite ready for the workforce yet, but Gen Z. So they'll be the 16-year-olds showing up in McDonald's in a year or two. Okay. This is significant because this has changed. This is the family, and it's kind of going through TV or radio. You know, you had that agricultural family, that big family. Everybody lived together. Nobody really traveled. You know, you had Sunday dinners together. Everybody lived within, walking distance. And then you had Father Knows Best. And then you had Dick Van Dyke and, the shows. The remarkable thing is they slept in twin beds. I don't know how they had Rob, but fully clothed in twin beds. Then you had the, All in the Family, and you go through it. Simpsons is 25 years in running. The Simpsons. This is the influence. This is the family that a lot of kids grew up with. Not Father Knows Best, but The Simpsons. By the way, the kids didn't put The Simpsons on. Adults did. Okay. And now you have Modern Family. Who would have thought? I mean, you couldn't talk about homosexuality. You couldn't talk about sex. And whether you like that or not, or you think we should go back to the good old way, it's irrelevant because we're not. Yeah, we need some restraints and controls, but we're not. But this is an evolution. In the background, what's happened is you went from Father Knows Best, where you had a two-person career. One person worked, generally the husband, and the wife followed, and so did the family. You moved around. A lot of you might have parents like that. One person supported the other in their career. And then you became to the baby boomers. Baby boomers were two careers. Professionals. You have an engineer and a physician. You have a nurse and a lawyer. You have people working professions. And then you had the Gen X, and it was two company careers. You changed. My daughter was an example. She had traits in one, and then she went to another. You went these lateral jumps. You went to different companies. You stayed in the same job, what you were trained for, but you went to different companies. And that was the beginning of job hopping in the 80s and the 90s. And now you have two or more careers. And many of us in this room may be there. You were trained for one career, and you switched. I've been described as a Gen Y trapped in a baby boomer body. I made a leap in 1995 from one career to the other. I don't think it was a leap. I used the same skills that I used in that profession to run this business, and I still do. But people now have skills, and they have different careers versus being in that same job for 40 years. Gold watches are done. They're done. Now you should get a gold watch if you stay for 5 years. And if you stayed in 5 years in the same job, you probably aren't as skilled as you used to be because you just got stagnant. And the job will go away, or somebody comes in and better, and it gets phased out. So again, all this is in the background of what's changing, and it's not considered. And then you have social media. By the way, this slide is 4 years old. This was all the social media at that time. Okay. At the top, you have comments and reputation. How many people use sites like Yelp, TripAdvisor, anything? You go up, you get opinions, and said, that will never work. Well, guess what? They're getting opinions on your workplace, too. How do people decide where I want to work? They do research. Skilled top people do research on your company using social media before you get there. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. But this has changed how we communicate. And we're struggling. I heard, in fact, he's going to be one of the speakers at one of the seminars on legal matters, legal unemployment. And law has a big problem with social media, with confidentiality, and employers have a big problem with productivity. My advice is figure out how to make it work for you, because it's not going away. It's really tough to control. And if you shut down people's devices, take them away, personal devices, because they're on your payroll, they'll find a way around it, or they won't work for you. because the skilled people have a way to get it done. Unemployment by age, which is also significant. The statistics vary, but 16 to 24-year-olds are the highest unemployment rate. My good friend Ed Gordon just spoke the other day, and his current statistic is unemployment rate between 16 and 24 is 56 years old, or 56%. 56% of 24 and under are unemployed. Now you can say, well, so what? The high school kids, but they used to work part-time. Now there's not as many part-time jobs because now you have mature people trying to do it. And would you rather have a 26-year-old or a 16-year-old flipping hamburgers? It's there. So again, statistically, it's a problem. Economically, it's a problem because this is when people start learning skills, start putting money away, paying off their debt, going to college, and there are no good jobs. There's a lot of underqualified people. Okay, I mentioned the gray ceiling before. Okay, we have an aging population who's not retiring. It's worldwide. Japan's in terrible condition, terrible shape. China and India, despite what we think about them, India will continue to grow. China is going to have a problem because they have the one-child law, only males. Tough to reproduce. They have lots of people, but reproduction is going to be a problem. And they are currently running into a skilled labor force problem. India has a skilled labor problem. They outsource to Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia. Everybody's outsourcing. When we outsource to China, China hires people in Vietnam to do skilled jobs. Okay. For those of you who have heard me speak before, this is kind of one of the classic slides, but I won't even go back to the 1890s or the 1900 that our population looked like a pyramid, that the largest percentage of the population was 0 to 4 years old, and it worked up. And then above 55 years old, it looked like a little spindle, a little antenna on top of a building. And because there weren't that many people. If you lived to be 100, there was one person every couple of weeks, and you were on the Today Show. Okay, now it's a rolling screen. I mean, it's not uncommon to have a lot of people there, and we've reached the baby boomers, but even in 2000, look at that red. That was the sweet spot of unemployment. That was of the employee workforce. 35 to 54. That was where the highly skilled activity was. That group is moving up, and the group underneath it is a little smaller. The workforce is decreasing by 5%, but we still have this increasing dependency. We have more and more people that will be collecting Medicare and Social Security. And you also do have a widening base below 18 years old. And I don't want, this isn't a political comment, but below 18 years old, half the population is a minority. And the highest dropout rates and the highest poverty rates are in minorities. So even though that population's grown, we don't have a really large, highly skilled base coming from there. When you have high dropout rates, it was on NPR the other day, you might have heard it, but 50% of all school-age children, elementary school children, are eligible for food stamps or for lunch programs. 50% across the country. That means there's a lot of people who aren't making it. But that's our future workforce, eventually. So a lot of challenges. Ultimately, everybody screwed up. Nobody ever thought there was going to be that many healthy, active people living in their 90s. My mother, as I said, turned 90 when she was 89 3/4. She took a 3-week cruise and tour of Europe with 2 other people, and the 2 other people who were 70 and 74 stayed in their rooms every other day because they were tired. My mother says, I'm not getting back, I'm not missing a step. And there's other people like that. Her neighbor, who's 92, is running back and forth between his condo next to her and Indonesia because he runs businesses over there. Okay. Changes dramatically. Again, going on, a lot of extra things here. Okay. We all know, we hit this before, I'm going to move on from there. And then the millennials. Whether you like it or not, millennials currently make up about half the workforce. In the next 7 years, they will make up 50%, and in the next 15 years or less, they will make 75% of the workforce. Go back to that original comment about bad attitude. Think about different attitude. Think about the type of jobs. Think about the work that's needed. It's going to be dramatically changed. This was a big switch. It used to be 3 male workers to 1 female. And the female jobs were line workers, factory workers. They were the nurses. Males were the physicians. Legal assistants were female. Lawyers were physicians, lawyers were male. And then you had this switch. And we still, many companies, much of our workforce talks about it, that it's still a male-dominated workforce. At the senior levels, at the boardroom level, it's still male-dominated. It's changing, but it's still slow. But across the board, skilled workers, the most skilled workers coming out are now female, much higher graduation rate. It's almost switched. It's almost 2 to 1, females to male. %40 of the workforce of the workforce between 25 and 64 of women hold a degree compared to 11% 40 years ago. Many of us still remember, hey, when I went to college, when I went to college, in my profession, in my class, there were 162 in the class, 11 females, 1 black. The class is now 70% females and minorities. 60% of all college degrees conferred last year were women. There's more doctoral degrees conferred on women than male. Skill gaps, we hit on this earlier. I'm not going to repeat it. Yeah. These are a lot of statistics, some similar. Again, they're in your notes. By the way, what are we on time? Okay, perfect. Okay. And as I said earlier, the skill gaps are going to widen. In manufacturing, the shortfall currently is about 80 to 100,000 people. It's expected to go to 875,000. The jobs are going to be very different. We're not talking production workers. We're talking about technology, technicians, robotics. We're talking about much more sophisticated jobs. Healthcare, you're not talking people who can carry boxes. You're talking people who can operate robotics and design it. Healthcare, the same. Currently, they project that we're currently at a rate of 130,000 physicians will be short. This was predicted well before Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as it's affectionately known. 800,000 nurses. This is actually cut back. It was about 2 million, but there's been a lot of change. But there's no way to produce enough people, and especially if you have nurses who currently have the attitude that they don't have to continue their education because it's just a job. That will continue to be a problem. Front page of the Time a few months ago. By 2020, we believe people's supply will be the most critical driving factor for business success. Companies may go to extreme lengths in their search for talent. Without this talent, they will be unable to compete. That's why you're here today. Room should be packed. Good news is you're here. They're not. You'll be ahead of the game. Okay. Competency list. You need to go back and say, what are the skills that we really need? Is appearance needed? I mean, I work in a world where we have an online performance review system, and I'm appalled. One is annual reviews are done. As much as we have a software program to do it, they're done. It's got to be continual feedback. It's got to be ongoing, continuous. But some of the skills and some of the competencies and some of the things that are being evaluated, yes, appearance is important, but if they don't have good appearance, why are they there anyway? At the end of a year, it's like you got an A on appearance. What about logical thinking, decision-making, cooperation, teamwork, positive attitude, customer service? What technical skills do you know? But we're still stuck on evaluating appearance and attendance. It shouldn't be attendance, it should be productivity. It should be their outcome. If they came to work and they got done what you used to do in 8 hours and they can get that done in 4, why you penalize them? You can't go home? You can't do it from home? Survey after survey says that people who telecommute get more done at home than they do at work. Because what happens at work? Your boss comes in, they have too many meetings, there's too many disruptions and distractions. You work from home, people that are skilled people get things done. And how many people used to come in early, stayed late when nobody was in the office? Now you can do it by home. You take a day off a week to get caught up. So you probably do 50% of your work on the one day at home, and the four other days you go to meetings and things. So again, the skill set that's required needs to be changed. The left is important, but they're changed. You got to think about them differently. In education, we can spend an entire morning, and I think the next summit is on education, if I heard correctly, early on. So if I'm in the audience or up here, I'd love to be part of it. But education, our country is in really bad shape with education. Lots of reasons, and it's not a condemnation of secondary schools, of primary schools. We're really got a lot of trouble. We still teach repetitive. A lot of teachers repeat repetitive. It's static. It's history. It's memorization. Small picture. As opposed to it's constantly adapting. It's innovative. We need to talk about analytical. One thing about gaming. We complain about social media and gaming. Kids spend too much time. What kids learn from gaming is teamwork and collaboration. Even though they're doing it by themselves, they're learning how to do it virtually. They're competing. These online games, like I can't even keep up with them anymore, but games like War of Warcraft, games that people went on that had to get to higher levels and higher tiers, many times you're doing it alone, but many times you're competing. You've got to collaborate with other people, especially these online games, to advance. You can't do it alone. They may have a bad work attitude of showing up for work, but they understand the concept of collaboration and teamwork. Sometimes to the point that they can't make a decision, and if all their friends aren't doing it, they don't do it. But they are highly skilled at teamwork and collaboration, and somewhere you got to take the good with the bad. And how do we change that? I did see last night that the trophy kids, I think it was on the local news, that some of the schools are going to stop giving participation awards. Remember, we went through a 10 or 15-year period where there were no winners and losers. Everybody won. You know, you didn't strike out. The movie Billy Crystal, it's about family something. I forget the name of it. It was just out, and it was like he was announcing the game, and the kid struck out, and it's like, you know, his grandson was pitching, and the kid got 3 strikes, and he stands up, and he goes, "You struck him out." And they go, "No, they keep hitting until they hit the ball. Keep swinging until they hit the ball." Well, that's what happened. I mean, you didn't have a first-place team. You had everybody participated. Everybody got a blue ribbon. That pendulum, unfortunately, is swinging back a little bit. Not that you need to be super competitive, but it needs to move back a bit. Education just isn't keeping pace. You've read about it. Again, stats are up here. But 65% of today's grade children will end up at jobs that haven't been invented yet. You need to teach skills that are evolving. You need to teach transferable skills. You need to teach people how to think, how to work with other people. Much different than in the past. It's not about individual, that it's you and you only. It's how do you work with other people. Again, a lot of these statistics they're out. The American Management Association was one of the groups that fit in with this logical thinking, logical skills. Nearly 1 in 5 millennials are perceived to be lacking analytical skills when compared with other generations in the workplace. The study that came out the other day said it's across the board. They may be more, but it's bad across the board. 3 million students drop out annually, 1 every 29 seconds in our country. Every metropolitan area in our country, the top 50, has a lower than 50% graduation rate. It's sad. And we're not creating jobs for them anymore. You cannot not only get a high school education, you definitely can't drop out and get a decent job. The competition to even work at McDonald's, you don't even qualify for that anymore because kids that have high school diplomas and corporations are taking some responsibility to say, if you don't have a diploma, you need to go back to school. We're not hiring you. Probably they have choices now to do it, but that's their social responsibility. This was just announced the other day, the literacy, 32 million U.S. adults can't read. They're in the workforce. Some of them are in the workforce. The literacy rate is tremendous. 21% of U.S. adults read below the 5th grade level. 9% of high school graduates can't read. How do you, in community colleges, every community college leader that I talk to says that their number one course is remedial reading and math. Graduate college, you get into college, and the first course you take is remedial reading and math. Okay. Unemployment by education, you can see. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. That divide is going to happen. So where are we? Blah, blah, blah. Lots of talks, lots of summits, lots of workforce development, a lot of initiatives, a lot of government stuff, a lot of bureaucracy. If you search for workforce development, put my name in, Huffington Post. Our article was just got published last night, was submitted a while ago. It was like why workforce isn't working. It fits individual businesses as well. Basically, you just heard the first 4 reasons that doesn't work. Disruptive technology, definition of work's changing, types of jobs that are changing, 4 generations in the workplace, massive changes. You gotta plan your future in that context. And if you don't, you're just going to get further and further behind. Is the traditional job dead? Yeah, pretty much. Towers Watson workforce study. Again, you've got the slides. You can search for this on your own, or I'm happy to send you anything you need. My email and everything's on the back, and I'll be around this morning if you have additional questions. I talked about engagement before. Engagement's at almost an all-time low. Every study's coming out that about 3/4 of the workforce is disengaged, significantly disengaged. A lot of unemployed workers on the payroll. Employee expectations, again, generational, also boomers. Boomers want flexibility. At one time, everybody wanted security. Now they want to be able to go to Florida. They want to see their grandkids. They want to be able to take off. They want to do other things. And sometimes they have to do it. They need flexibility just for health reasons. Despite the older you get, the more visits you're going to have. More aches and pains you have, the more things go wrong. I'm a walking example. Salaries, it's about prosperity. Benefits, it's about opportunities. Promotion, it's about career opportunity. Okay. Emerging best practices, you're going to hear a lot of it. This is really a short summary we're going to hear about from the 2 companies. Number 1, collect data. HR is horrible. Workforce people are horrible at collecting data. It's not about turnover, how many people we hired last year. It's about all the other data. What's the profile of a successful employee in your company? Where is the turnover? Why is the turnover caused? Don't blame it on HR because maybe they're hiring the right people and you have lousy managers. Maybe it's your benefits. Maybe it's your hours. You really need to take a look back, and almost every journal that's out there is talking about HR data, HR analytics. Collect data, it's more data, mine the data, analyze the data, go back. That's your solution. The answer's somewhere in the data. And HR to this point, workforce to this point, has not been data-driven. It's been anecdotal. And studies like we had this morning, and going back and say, where do we fit in there? What are we doing wrong? How do we differentiate ourselves? More actions. Again, just kind of a step-by-step. Be imaginative about recruiting. In the shower, you always come up with great ideas this morning. You've heard this term with salespeople, hunters and farmers. Hunters who go out and get the accounts. The farmers are the people who get to nurture them, and the customer service and the account people. Recruiters, your business needed to be hunters to find the skilled labor you need. And it's not just hiring a headhunter. It's coming to an event like this. It's going to your local stores. It's going to college campuses. Recruiting you need headhunters, not farmers. And recruiting is filled with farmers. They're going out to the fields and picking the fruit, but there's no fruit. Now they can't even find the right field. And the crops aren't so good. So again, a change. Hire the person, not the function. If you find a talent, somebody highly motivated, skilled, a lot of potential, hire them. People are hiring people now even when they don't have jobs because they know they can use them somewhere. They bring something different to the table. Reinvent management is a favorite of mine. Got to look differently. And it makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. Conclusion. Don't be lulled into complacency as a result of high employment. I don't think this group is there because you're here, but it is a message that I convey. The traditional job is dead. Work and workplace will grow increasingly complex, more ambiguous, uncertain, volatile. Skill gaps will widen and worsen. Recruitment of top talent will become more difficult, and turnover will increase dramatically. For those of you who have had employees that have been on your payroll for 20, 30, and 40 years, and you say, our turnover isn't bad, recognize when that one person leaves, that the next person in place, if you're lucky, will be there 2 or 3 years. And that ultimately increases your turnover. Not annually, but it increases it. And the more baby boomers you have, if you didn't do a demographic study, you don't know how many people are in each generation, you need to go back and do that first. Because it will help you anticipate when the wheel falls off. And there's a lot of companies I talk to that say they have, we don't have a problem with turnover. We have loyal employees. And the moment you lose the one, you'll have churn in that position. There's no question about it. And especially if you try to model them after the last person who was hired 40 years ago, even 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. Okay. Good news, in spite of it all, as I said, you can be the tallest person in a group of short people. Because so many companies aren't doing, you don't have to do everything right, but you have to keep doing things. You have to move forward with this. It is the future of the business to be dangerous. Okay? Change is accelerating. Uniformity is giving way to diversity. Complexity is increasing. I attached, not going to go through this, I attached on the back a list of questions that I provide to clients when I'm doing consulting work. It's a list of questions about what do you need to ask, step by step. Take them, think about it, use it at your next meetings, your management meetings, and I will be around at the end, like everyone else, to answer any questions. Thank you.